Sarah had exactly 10 minutes before security escorted her out of the building. She had lost her job, her dignity, and her future, all because of a lie she couldn't disprove. But as she packed her box, a woman she'd never spoken to, the night shift cleaner, slid a yellow folder onto her desk. Inside was a single document that didn't just prove Sarah's innocence. It proved her boss was committing a multi-million-dollar federal crime. In the next 10 minutes, the hunter became the hunted. This is the story of how an invisible employee and a silent witness took down a corporate empire. You won't believe what was hidden on page 4. Welcome to Invisible Stories. Kindly hit that subscribe button if you enjoy stories like this. I love hearing from you all. Sterling Architectural Designs didn't feel like an office. It felt like a church. The ceilings were high. The floors were white marble that clicked under every heel like a metronome counting down your worth. The air conditioning hummed at exactly the right temperature, cold enough to keep you sharp, cold enough to remind you that comfort wasn't something you were owed here. Every morning, the smell of expensive espresso drifted out from the partner's lounge, a room Sarah Mitchell had never been invited into, not once in 4 years. Sarah was 31 years old. She had a master's degree in structural design from Columbia. She had quietly, invisibly designed 3 of the buildings currently reshaping the New York skyline. If you stood at the corner of 5th and 47th and looked up, 2 of those glass towers were hers. Her calculations, her late nights, her cold coffee, and her aching wrists. But inside Sterling Architectural Designs, Sarah Mitchell did not exist. The partners called her the quiet one. The junior staff assumed she was a contractor. Even the receptionist, after 4 years, still asked for her name when she came in on weekends. Sarah had learned to stop correcting people. She kept her head down, did the work, and told herself that one day, the right person would notice. She called it her invisibility. She would eat lunch at her desk. She would stay until 11 p.m. when everyone else left at 6. She would fix other people's mistakes without telling anyone, because drawing attention to a partner's error felt more dangerous than covering it up. She was a ghost, drifting through marble corridors, doing the work that built an empire, collecting none of the credit. She thought that invisibility was protecting her. She had no idea it was what made her the perfect target. The morning everything ended, it started the way every other morning started. Sarah arrived at 7:43 a.m. She placed her tote bag under her desk. She opened her laptop, pulled up the Meridian Tower file she'd been working on for 6 weeks, and reached for her coffee. That's when the room changed. It wasn't a sound. It was more like a pressure shift, the way the air feels right before a thunderstorm. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Keyboards went quiet. Even the AC seemed to hold its breath. Richard Sterling walked in. He was 62 years old, silver-haired, and built like a man who had never once been told no. He wore suits that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. He had the kind of face that smiled in photos and revealed absolutely nothing in person. Partners straightened their backs when he walked past. Junior staff found reasons to look at their screens. Sarah looked up once, then back at her monitor. She didn't know he was walking toward her, not until his shadow fell across her desk. "Ms. Mitchell?" His voice was calm. That was the first warning sign. Richard Sterling only got quiet when he had already won. Sarah looked up slowly. "Mr. Sterling?" "Would you care to explain," he said, loud enough for the entire floor to hear, "why the Meridian Tower structural files were accessed from an external server at 2 a.m. last Thursday?" Sarah's stomach dropped. What?" "The files were transmitted to a competitor firm." He let that sit in the air for a moment, watching her face. "Callaway Design Group,
our biggest rival, the full structural blueprints, 6 weeks of proprietary work. I didn't, Sarah started. We have the IP logs. He placed a single printed sheet on her desk. Your login credentials, your access code, 2:14 a.m. That's not possible. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands had gone cold. I was home. I was asleep. Someone must have... Industrial espionage. He said it slowly, clearly, like he wanted every person on that floor to hear each syllable. That is what this is, Ms. Mitchell, and that is what this company will be calling it to every firm, every hiring board, and every professional body that asks. The room was completely silent. Sarah looked around. 23 colleagues, not one of them met her eyes. "Clear your desk," Sterling said. "Security will escort you out in 10 minutes." He turned and walked away without another word. And just like that, 4 years, 3 skyscrapers, and every late night she had ever given to this building became nothing. Sarah's hands moved on autopilot. Her coffee mug, her charger, the small framed photo of her mother, a half-finished sketchbook, a plant she'd kept alive for 2 years on a windowsill that technically belonged to someone else. One cardboard box. That was all 4 years amounted to. She didn't cry. Not in front of these people who had already decided she was guilty. She pressed her lips together and focused on the box, the plant, the sketchbook, the charger. That's when she felt it. Someone standing very close to her desk. Sarah looked up, expecting security. Instead, she found a small woman in a dark cleaning uniform, white apron, white cap, a mop handle in one hand. Her face was unreadable. Her eyes were calm in a way that felt almost out of place in this moment, in this building, in this disaster. Sarah had never spoken to her. She wasn't even sure she had ever truly noticed her. The cleaner reached into the front pocket of her apron, slowly, and slid a yellow envelope under the stack of old sketches sitting on the edge of Sarah's desk. A single word was stamped across it in red block letters: confidential. The cleaner didn't smile. She didn't explain. She leaned in, just slightly, and said 7 words in a voice so low Sarah almost missed them. "The monsters here aren't afraid of police." She paused. "They're afraid of the truth on page 4. Then she picked up her mop, turned and walked away, slow and steady, like she hadn't just handed Sarah a grenade. Sarah stared at the yellow envelope. Security appeared at the end of the corridor. She tucked the envelope deep into the box, under the sketchbook, under the plant, and kept her face completely blank as the guard in the gray uniform walked her past Richard Sterling's office, past 23 silent colleagues, and out through the marble lobby into the cold New York air. She didn't look back, but she felt Sterling watching her through the glass. The bench was cold. Sarah sat in Bryant Park, 3 blocks from the office, with the cardboard box on her lap and the yellow envelope balanced on top of her sketchbook. Around her, the city moved the way it always did. Pigeons, strollers, a man arguing on his phone, a food cart sending the smell of roasted nuts into the November air. Nobody looked at her. Nobody cared that her life had just ended. She pulled the envelope out slowly. Her name wasn't on it. There was no address, no date, just that single red stamp pressed into the yellow paper. Confidential. She opened it. Inside was a folder, the kind you'd find in any office, pale card with a metal clasp, nothing dramatic about it. But her hands were trembling as she opened the clasp, and the first page slid out onto her lap. It was a corporate filing document, standard formatting, legal letterhead, columns of small text. The company name at the top read Callaway Design Group, LLC. Sarah frowned. That was the competitor firm Sterling had accused her of leaking to. She'd heard the name before, mostly as a cautionary tale in meetings. Callaway is gaining ground. Callaway snagged the Riverside contract. Keep your work locked down or Callaway will steal it. She kept reading. Page 1 was registration documents, a Delaware LLC, filed 18 months ago. Standard stuff. She scanned the signatory lines at the bottom, looking for names she recognized. Nothing on page 1. Page 2 was a list of company directors. She read each name carefully. Still nothing. Page 3 was a financial summary, capital investments, account numbers, offshore transfers listed in clean rows. The numbers made her breath catch. These weren't small figures. 7 digits, 8, moving between accounts in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, and a holding company registered in Cyprus. Her mouth went dry. She turned to page 4. At the top, in plain black text, was a single name listed under beneficial owner, ultimate controlling party. Richard H. Sterling. She read it twice, then a third time. Her brain tried to reject it the way a body rejects something poisonous. Richard Sterling owned Callaway Design Group, the rival firm he had just accused her of leaking to. His rival firm was his. He had created it. He controlled it. He was, in effect, stealing his own company's work, moving it through a shell company he owned, and billing clients twice, once through Sterling Architectural Designs, once through Callaway. And that wasn't even the full picture. The offshore accounts told the rest of the story. Money going in, different money coming out, moving through 3 countries before it landed, clean and untraceable, in a private fund registered to a name she didn't recognize, but which she was almost certain, if someone with the right clearance looked closely enough, would trace straight back to him. This wasn't just corporate theft. This was money laundering, federal, multimillion-dollar. The kind of crime that didn't end with a fine or a resignation. It ended with handcuffs and a courtroom. Sarah sat very still on that cold bench. She thought about the IP logs Sterling had placed on her desk, her login credentials, her access code, used at 2 a.m. when she was home, asleep, with her phone on charge and her door locked. He hadn't just fired her to protect himself. He had set her up to protect himself. She was supposed to be the story, the disgruntled employee, the industrial spy, while the real crime, his crime, stayed buried under her name. The pigeons kept walking in circles near her feet. The man on the phone kept arguing. The city kept moving. Sarah closed the folder carefully, slid it back into the yellow envelope, and placed it at the very bottom of the cardboard box, under everything else. She stood up, adjusted the box against her hip, and started walking. She didn't know where she was going yet, but she knew one thing with complete certainty. Richard Sterling had spent 4 years making her invisible. He was about to find out exactly how dangerous an invisible person could be.
Sarah didn't go home. Instead, she walked 6 blocks to a coffee shop she'd never been to before, chose a table in the back corner facing the door, and opened her laptop with fingers that still hadn't fully warmed up. She needed to think, without the panic eating through her chest getting in the way. Start with what you know, she told herself. You're an architect. You solve problems by understanding structure. Start with the structure. The structure here was simple and terrifying. Sterling Architectural Designs was a legitimate firm, award-winning, well-connected, federally contracted. It worked on public buildings, government infrastructure, city projects, which meant it had security clearances, which meant it had access to restricted design data. Callaway Design Group was, on paper, a separate firm, a competitor, but it was registered 18 months ago to a Delaware holding company, and the beneficial owner on page 4 of that folder was Richard Sterling. She started digging. Delaware LLC registrations were public. She found Callaway in 12 minutes, listed under a parent company called Vantage Holdings LLC.
She searched Vantage Holdings, another holding company, registered in Wyoming this time. She followed the chain, Wyoming to Cyprus, Cyprus to Luxembourg, Luxembourg to a private wealth management account listed under a name she'd never heard, Aldrich Developments. She almost missed it. But she'd spent 4 years reading financial documents attached to architectural bids, and something about the account structure felt familiar. She pulled up the Meridian Tower project files she still had stored locally, 6 weeks of work she'd saved out of habit, and cross-referenced the project's investor list. Aldrich Developments had contributed $4.3 million in early-stage funding to the Meridian Tower project, which meant Richard Sterling had invested his own laundered money into his own company's biggest contract and was billing the city of New York for a building he was secretly funding himself. Her coffee went cold. She didn't notice. This wasn't just fraud. This was systematic, planned, running for years probably, and it had federal fingerprints all over it, government contracts, offshore accounts, forged documents. She thought about what the cleaner had said. The monsters in this building aren't afraid of police. Now she understood. Sterling had connections, legal teams, people in positions of power who benefited from his silence and his money. Going to a local precinct with a yellow folder wasn't going to work. Sterling would bury it before the ink dried on the report. She needed something bigger, something he couldn't reach. But first, she needed to understand why Sarah had chosen her. She thought about the woman's face, calm, certain, those eyes that didn't flinch even when the whole room was holding its breath. That wasn't someone acting on impulse. That was someone who had been waiting for the right moment, waiting for the right person. But why Sarah? Why now? Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she answered. "Don't go home." The voice was low, female, familiar. "There's a gray brick entrance on West 38th between the laundromat and the print shop. 3rd buzzer from the bottom. I'll be inside." The line went dead. Sarah looked at her phone, then at the yellow envelope in her bag. She closed her laptop, paid in cash, and walked out into the cold.
She felt him before she saw him. That specific feeling of being watched. Not paranoia, but something real and physical, like a temperature drop at the back of your neck. Sarah was 2 blocks from West 38th when it started. She slowed at a shop window, pretending to look at the display, and used the reflection to scan the street behind her. Gray coat, big man, walking at exactly her pace, not fast enough to catch up, not slow enough to fall behind, keeping a distance of about 40 feet. She'd never seen him before, but she recognized the type. Still face, hands loose at his sides, eyes that weren't looking at her directly, which meant he was trained well enough to know that direct eye contact was the first thing a target notices. This was Sterling's security chief, a man named Doyle, whose official title was head of corporate risk. Unofficially, she would learn this later, he was the person Richard Sterling called when a problem needed to stop being a problem. She turned onto 38th. The laundromat was halfway down the block, warm light spilling through its windows. The print shop was dark. Between them was a gray brick entrance, old iron buzzer panel, peeling paint on the doorframe. She didn't look back. She pressed the 3rd buzzer from the bottom. The door clicked open immediately. Inside was a stairwell, bare concrete, one flickering overhead light. She went up 1 flight, turned the corner, and found a door already open. The cleaner was inside. She'd changed out of her uniform, dark jeans, a navy jacket, gray hair pulled back from her face. Without the apron and cap, she looked smaller, but those eyes were the same, calm, waiting. "You were followed," the woman said, not a question. Gray coat, started about 2 blocks back. The woman nodded slowly. "Doyle, he's Sterling's cleaner."
She paused at the word, something flickering across her face. Different kind of cleaner than me. "Who are you? Why did you give me that folder?" The woman was quiet for a moment. She moved to the window, careful not to stand in front of it, and looked down at the street below. "My name is Rita," she said. "I've worked a night shift at Sterling Architectural for 11 years. She paused. "My son worked there before me. Junior analyst. Smart kid. Too smart, maybe. He noticed some of the same numbers you just noticed tonight, and he made the mistake of asking questions." Sarah felt something cold move through her. "What happened to him?" "Sterling's legal team produced documents showing my son had stolen $40,000 from a client account. Evidence, IP logs, signed statements." Her voice stayed flat and steady, but her hands gripped the windowsill. "Sound familiar?" It did. "He went to prison, 3 years. He's out now, but he can't work in finance, can't work in anything with a license or a clearance. Sterling took his future the same way he tried to take yours, except he had more time to build the case against my son, so it stuck." Sarah sat down slowly on the edge of an old chair. "I've been collecting that file for 4 years, Rita said. "Every document I could access, every printout left on a desk, every USB drive that got left in a port overnight. Night shift cleaners are invisible. People leave things out when they think nobody's watching." "Why me? Why today?" "Because Sterling was about to move. He's been preparing to dissolve Callaway and close the offshore accounts. Another 6 weeks and that paper trail disappears. He needed to fire someone first, create a suspect, create a news story, so that when the accounts close, anyone who looks sees a disgruntled employee theft, not his fraud." She looked at Sarah directly. "You could have gone to the FBI with that folder yourself." "I'm the mother of a convicted fraudster," Rita said quietly. "Who's going to believe me?" Silence. "But you," Rita continued, "you're the wrongfully fired architect with your name on stolen files and a clean record. You're the one they set up. You're the one who has a reason to talk and a story that makes people listen." Downstairs, something moved. Both of them froze. A sound, the stairwell door, one slow footstep, then another. Rita grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward a back door Sarah hadn't noticed. "Fire escape, down to the alley. There's a subway entrance on the corner, the Uptown 2 and 3. Stay in the middle of the platform. Stay near the cameras." "What about you?" "I know this building better than he does. Go." Sarah went. The platform was loud and bright in the way that New York subway platforms always were, that specific mix of screeching metal, warm stale air, and the rumble of something coming from far away in the dark. Sarah stood near the yellow line, back against a pillar, eyes on the stairs. Doyle appeared 40 seconds later. He was bigger up close, broad shoulders, that same still face. He spotted me immediately and started walking, not running, which was almost worse. Running meant panic. That walk meant certainty. Sarah's train wasn't there yet. She moved, not away from him, but sideways, toward the far end of the platform, keeping the crowd between them. He adjusted. She adjusted. They moved through the platform like two people playing chess, except one of them was sweating through her jacket, and the other looked like he'd done this 100 times. The rumble got louder. She could see the headlights now, far down the tunnel. She glanced back. Doyle was 15 feet away, moving through a gap in the crowd. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket, just slightly, just enough. The train hit the platform with a wave of hot air and screaming brakes. The doors opened. Sarah stepped on. She turned. Doyle was right at the door. And Rita stepped out of the crowd behind him, placed a hand flat on his back, and said something directly into his ear, something Sarah couldn't hear. Whatever it was, Doyle went completely still. The doors closed. Sarah's last image as the train pulled away was Rita standing on the platform, hands in her jacket pockets, watching the train go, and Doyle, 2 feet in front of her, not moving, calm as a woman who had been waiting 11 years for this exact moment.
Sarah had one person she trusted. Raymond Osei had been her professor at Columbia, the man who had written her recommendation letter, who had told her she was the most naturally gifted structural thinker he'd seen in 15 years of teaching. He'd moved into private consultancy 3 years ago, but they still met for coffee twice a year. He was the closest thing she had to a mentor. She called him from a payphone, old habit her mother had drilled into her. When you're scared, use something they can't track. And he picked up on the second ring. "Sarah, I've been hearing things. Are you all right?" "I need to see you," she said. "Tonight. I need advice, and I need someone I can trust." A pause. "Of course. Come to the office. You know where I am." She did. She should have listened to the pause. Raymond's consultancy was on the 14th floor of a building on Lexington. Clean, quiet, the kind of office where the plants were real and the coffee was freshly ground. Sarah arrived at 8 p.m. The receptionist was gone. The lights in the main room were low. She pushed Raymond's office door open. He was at his desk, on a video call. His back was to her, but the screen was angled just enough. She saw the face on the other end of the call. Silver hair, the kind of face that smiled in photos and revealed nothing in person. Richard Sterling. She didn't breathe. She didn't move. She heard her own name. "Mitchell, has she contacted you?" And she heard Raymond's voice. "Not yet. But if she does..." Sarah stepped back from the door. She turned, walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and stood there with her heart doing something violent inside her chest until the doors opened and she stepped inside. She did not cry in that elevator. She pressed the ground floor button and stared at her own reflection in the steel doors. Raymond. 4 years of twice-yearly coffee. 4 years of, "You're the best student I ever taught." 4 years of someone she thought saw her. He didn't see her. He saw a useful contact, a favor he'd been saving for the right moment. The elevator opened. She walked out. She walked on to Lexington Avenue and stood in the cold and let the city noise wash over her for a full 30 seconds. Then she felt it. Something in her bag, a faint, almost imperceptible heat. She pulled out the yellow folder. Her eyes went to the confidential stamp in the top right corner. She tilted the folder toward the streetlight and looked, really looked, at the red ink of that stamp. It was slightly raised, slightly thick, in a way that normal ink wasn't. She thought about what Rita had said. He chose you because you were good at your job and completely alone. She thought about Doyle finding her so quickly. She thought about how Sterling always seemed to be 3 steps ahead. She took the stamp to the corner of a doorway and pressed it hard against the metal frame, once, twice, like she was trying to transfer an ink impression. Inside the stamp, something cracked. Something very small fell out onto the pavement. She crouched down. It was barely visible, a flat circular disc no bigger than a watch battery. A tracker. They hadn't been chasing her. They had been following her, letting her move freely, letting her panic, letting her lead them, straight to wherever Rita was keeping the rest of the evidence. There was more than one folder. Rita had told her, every document I could access, 4 years of collecting. One folder was the hook, the rest was somewhere else. An evidence locker, she had called it, a storage unit, a safe house, something. And for the last 3 hours, Sarah had been a homing signal pointed directly at it. She looked at the tracker in her palm. She thought for exactly 4 seconds. Then she walked to the nearest taxi idling at the curb, bent down to the driver's window, and pressed the tracker into the gap between the bumper and the rear panel. "Have a good night," she said. The taxi pulled away uptown. She walked downtown. The Meridian Tower Gala had been on the calendar for months. Sterling Architectural Design's flagship project, the building Sarah had spent 6 weeks designing, was having its official investor showcase. 300 people, city officials, federal contractors. The kind of room where a man like Richard Sterling felt completely, permanently safe. It was happening tonight, in 4 hours. Sarah stood in a phone booth on West 34th and called Rita. Rita answered in 2 rings. "You found the tracker?" You knew it was there, Sarah said. It wasn't quite an accusation. I suspected, Rita said. I wasn't sure until you called from a public phone instead of your mobile. You were testing me. I was making sure you were smart enough, Rita said simply. Sarah let that sit for a moment. I know where we need to go. The Meridian Tower Gala. Sterling's keynote is at 10 p.m. It's going to be projected on the main display system in the atrium. Investor data, project highlights, the whole presentation. Silence. I designed that building, Sarah said. I know every access corridor, every maintenance panel, every restricted system. I can get us into the AV control room in 20 minutes from a service entrance that isn't on the main security grid, because I designed it not to be, to protect the building's internal systems from outside hacking. She let the irony of that sit in the air. What do you need from me? Rita said. How much of the financial evidence do you have stored? Everything. 11 years of documents, scanned copies on an encrypted drive, account records, transfer receipts, internal memos, the registration chain for Callaway, and every company above it. Can you get it to me in the next 90 minutes? Yes. Then we're going to the gala, Sarah said, and we're giving Richard Sterling the presentation of his life. The service entrance was exactly where she'd put it on the blueprints. They went in at 9:15 p.m., Sarah in a dark jacket, Rita carrying a small bag with the encrypted drive and a laptop. The maintenance corridor was narrow and warm, running behind the main atrium wall. Sarah had walked it 100 times in her head. She knew the third junction, the panel on the left, the secondary AV node that connected to the main display system. She'd built a backdoor into it. Not intentionally, it was an emergency access feature, designed to let authorized engineers override the display system if the main controls failed. She'd flagged it in her design notes, recommended it be password protected. Nobody had followed up on her recommendation. Nobody had been paying attention. She was in the system in 11 minutes. The main atrium on the other side of the wall was filling up. She could hear the noise of it, the crystal in the conversations, and the particular sound of very powerful people who felt very safe. She could see the display system menu on the laptop screen. Sterling's keynote presentation was queued up, 40 slides, stock images of clean buildings against blue skies, numbers that told a story of legitimate success. She replaced it with Rita's files, all of it, offshore account records, shell company registrations, the Callaway ownership chain, the Aldrich Development's connection to the Meridian Tower investors, the internal memos, 3 of them, signed by Sterling, discussing how to move the money before the end of the fiscal quarter. And page 4, always page 4, Richard H. Sterling, beneficial owner, ultimate controlling party. She queued the federal tip line, an encrypted submission portal she'd found in an hour of desperate research in the library computer, and uploaded a duplicate of everything while they waited. At 9:58, Richard Sterling stepped up to the podium. She hit play. She didn't see the moment it happened. She only heard it. First, the room went quiet, the specific quiet of 300 people all reading the same thing at the same time, then murmuring, then a voice, Sterling's voice, saying, "What is this? Shut it down, shut it." And then another voice, much louder, much more certain, "Mr. Sterling, please step away from the podium." Federal agents had been at the gala already, not for Sterling, not yet, but 2 of them were there as standard security detail for a city official in the room. When the encrypted tip submission had arrived 30 minutes earlier, flagged as high priority, the field office had made calls. By the time the slides went up, there were 6 more agents in the building. Sarah sat in the maintenance corridor with her back against the wall and her eyes closed, and listened to the sound of Richard Sterling's world collapsing on the other side of the wall. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Rita found her there 5 minutes later. She sat down beside Sarah in the corridor, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Outside, the sounds of the gala were different now, urgent, confused, the particular chaos of an evening that had stopped being an event and started being a crime scene. "It's done," Sarah said. "Yes," Rita agreed. Sarah looked at her. "He'll be charged. Callaway, the accounts, the Meridian funding, all of it's on that submission." "Yes." "And my name gets cleared. The IP logs were part of the setup. That should be provable now with access to his internal systems." "It will be." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You said you chose me because I was good at my job and alone in that building." She paused. "But you also said I was expendable, that if the plan failed, I'd take the heat." Rita didn't look away. "Yes, I said that." "Did you mean it?" A long silence. Rita's hands rested quietly in her lap. "When I started," she said slowly, "yes, I needed someone with access, someone with a reason to act, and someone whose name was already being used as a cover story. If it had gone wrong, if Doyle had gotten the folder, if Sterling had shut it down, you would have been the one holding the evidence. You would have taken the consequences." She stopped. "But you were smarter than I planned for," she said finally. "You found the tracker. You didn't run to a lawyer or the police. You thought it through. You built the exit strategy yourself." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite guilt, not quite pride. Something caught between them. "I stopped thinking of you as expendable somewhere around the time you figured out the taxi." Sarah looked at her for a long time. Then she laughed. A short, tired, real laugh that surprised her. 11 years of night shifts for this. 11 years, Rita said simply. Sarah stood up, brushed the dust from her jacket, picked up the laptop. "What do you do now?" she asked. Rita stood too, adjusted her jacket. "I already did what I came to do." She looked at Sarah with those steady, unreadable eyes. "What about you?" Sarah thought about her name on those blueprints, on 3 buildings that had reshaped the city skyline. She thought about 4 years of being invisible, of eating lunch at her desk, of fixing other people's mistakes in silence. She thought about how terrifying it had been to be seen tonight, to be heard, to make something happen in a room full of people who had never once looked at her.
She thought, surprisingly, that she didn't want to go back to being invisible. Not the old way, not the survival strategy, keep your head down, disappear into the cubicle way, but the new way, invisible by choice, moving through rooms unnoticed, watching, building, knowing things other people didn't. That kind of invisible she could work with. I think, Sarah said, I'm going to get some sleep, and then tomorrow I'm going to find the best wrongful termination lawyer in New York. She paused at the end of the corridor, where the maintenance door opened back out to the city. And then, she said, I'm going to design a better building. She pushed the door open. The cold air hit her like a beginning. She walked out into it. No box, no folder, no one watching, and disappeared into the city that she had quietly, invisibly, built.